Hello everybody and welcome to tonight's MHTV. Tonight we're talking about arts, performance and the emotional aspects of nursing. So we've got two really interesting guests who I'm going to let introduce themselves shortly and tell you a little bit about their work. But first, I'm going to hand over to Nicky to tell you a bit about the social media and how you can join in tonight.
Hello everyone, it's lovely to see you. As ever, you can join in by commenting on the Facebook Live page or you can tweet us on MHTV. If you've got any questions at all, anything you'd like to clarify, anything you'd like to join in with, please just let us know. Thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you, Nicky. Okay then, so Alex, are you okay if we start with you? If you could just maybe introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Sure, so my name is Alex Mermikides, and I'm not a healthcare professional. I come from an institution called the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, which is a specialist higher education establishment that trains musicians and actors and other theatre professionals. And we're very famous for having trained people like Michaela Cole and Papua Swedu, Orlando Bloom, Jude Law. But that's not my doing. I can't take responsibility for that, I'm afraid. I'm in the research department. And what we do in the research department is investigate the performing arts and the role that they play in society more broadly. And my little contribution to that is to think about theatre and performance in relation to healthcare and to medicine. And I do that research by writing academic tomes. And I've just had a book published called Performance Medicine and the Human, which you can put a link to a bit later. But I also do that research by making performances. And what I want to talk about is one of those performances that I've made and I make those performances in collaboration with patients and also healthcare professionals. Do you want to go to Fee now and then come back to me, or shall I carry on?
Yeah, I don't know, Fiona, should we go over to you just for an introduction and then we'll come back?
Yeah, sure.
That's all right.
Lovely. Hi everyone, my name's Fee and I work up at Edinburgh Napier University, and I'm an adult nurse by background, and I work up at the university as a nursing lecturer. And I've been involved for the last 3 years now in using drama as part of our curriculum to support our students in developing empathy and sympathetic presence and understanding different roles and situations to get a better understanding of things like, vast things like emotional well-being and stepping into the shoes of patients, but also healthcare professionals from different aspects of healthcare approaches. And also I've been involved in helping to understand big topics like health and social care integration. Try and get your head around that. It's so boring sometimes, so you have to make it interesting and engaging. So we've been using drama and co-producing projects with our students and with some service users up here in Edinburgh. So we've created a bit of a community up here, and we've created 2 plays which we've performed and filmed using staff and students and community actors as part of our cast and crew. So that's a bit about me and what I've been up to.
Fascinating, thank you. So Alex, should we go back over to you first of all?
Sure, yes. And David was going to kindly show some photos just so you can get a sense of what that show looks like. So I'm talking about a performance that's called Careful, and I made this in partnership with the nursing school at Kingston University and 2 lecturers in particular, Sally Richardson and Terry Firth, who are really helpful. And I spent the summer of 2016 in residence at the school, so observing lessons and interviewing students, so that the performance was created out of the experiences of trainee nurses and lecturers and others. As the name suggests, the show is about care, and it's particularly about the emotional context of caring. So former nurse and now author Mark Radcliffe argues that the fact that nurses feel is seriously overlooked in nursing policy and public debates, and particularly in the aftermath of the Francis report, where nurses' compassion was being policed, but the attention turned very much to kind of empathy and feeling, the importance of understanding the emotional context of the patient. But this show, we thought we wanted to manifest the feelings and including those uglier feelings that aren't always kind of nice and compassionate, so anger and guilt and exhaustion. And it often depicts those feelings through dance and physical theatre. So we've got a little picture of what that might look like on the next slide, Dave. Oh, sorry, the one afterwards. There, so that's a kind of image of somebody burdened by care. And the previous slide, please, now, thank you. So what happens in the show is that we meet these 5 characters, and they're 4 nurses and a midwife, actually. And each of them is put in a situation where their ability to care for a patient is put under pressure, or at least to care for them in a way that doesn't impact their emotional well-being. So they're really small kind of everyday stories, like nurse Helena's trying to keep her temper with Mr. Matthews, who's a kind of very imperious cardiac patient who keeps ringing her call bell for unnecessary things. Or you have Nurse Thalia in the green, who can't stop worrying about her patient who's had a stroke and then been whisked off, and she never hears from her. Well, she worries about her worries and chases her through the hospital to find out what's happened. So there's always this conflict between patient or person-centered care and self-care in that thing. And one thing we do, which is quite fun, is you don't see the patients. No one acts the patients. So you have to imagine who the patients are based on how the nurses are talking. So when one of them goes...
Yeah, why do you think that's particularly powerful, not to show the patient?
Well, the first time we did the show, as a sort of work in progress, we did it in the sim lab, and we had the audience in the beds as the patient. So they were being addressed directly. So you can get a real kind of sense of, what it's like to be a patient in the care, vulnerable, lying horizontal in the care of someone. And when we put students in that position, that was quite powerful.
Very.
And then when we turned it into we showed it in normal theatres. So in the sim lab, we could only get, 8 people in at any one time. So we thought we had to do it in a normal theatre, and we did it in a theatre of 450 people. Then what we did, we had to kind of address the whole audience as though they were a patient. And I suppose the learning point there was, the way in which the nurse adjusts herself to the person in front of her. So, so when Nurse Pip talks to Darren, she goes, "Hello, Darren, how are you?" And you can tell that that's a child. And, if someone else says, "Hello, Mrs. Chakrabarti," you can tell that, "Good morning," they say, rather than hello. You can tell, it's sort of also a sort of lesson in communication skills and kind of individualized care.
And from an empathy point of view, though, isn't it? Because it encourages the audience to focus on the nurses' interactions, whereas I think, you would automatically, put yourself perhaps in the patient's shoes rather than the nurses. So it forces you to focus on what's happening with the nursing.
Yeah, exactly. And that as a kind of tension.
Yeah.
So in an ideal world, it wouldn't be a tension, but if you're in a kind of busy ward or understaffed or just a lot to do, you have to, you might be in a situation where you have to sacrifice your own well-being in order to pay attention to the patient. And I say this not because I don't think it's important that we pay attention to patients. So one of the inspirations of this piece was, very kind of serious personal experience of illness. So, in 2004, my brother was diagnosed. He was 33 and he was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is a very acute and very deadly blood cancer. And he was in hospital for nearly a year, very aggressive chemotherapy, radiotherapy, a bone marrow transplant for which I was his donor. And that, it was really, life-changing situation just to witness, let alone what he went through. But we were really struck by the nurses and the way just a kind of small gesture or a look or a way of entering the room could have a big impact on how we felt. And being a theatre person, I really noticed that, because that's what we train our actors to do. How do you adjust yourself to create an emotion in somebody else? So the other aspect of the show is that we have these dance sequences, which are kind of more abstract, and where we work with, we take routines of kind of nursing, like neurological exams and blood pressure, and turn that into dance. The reason being that kind of music and movement together, I think, can create or suggest emotion in a way that drama or voices can't.
Definitely. I quite like Gecko Theatre. They do that a lot, don't they? Like demonstrating sort of emotion through dance. And first time I saw that, it was completely unique to me, but really, really powerful. The sense that you don't have to speak really, but you can portray so much through dance. I mean, I'm a big fan of ballet as well, and it's the same, isn't it, really?
Yeah. And it's kind of multiple different people interpret it in different ways. So, people make fun of interpretive dance, but they think there's something about leaving, a series of movements or music that is open, and then people can see what they, impose their own meaning, or feel what they feel, and that's true to them, even if someone else doesn't feel that way. So the piece isn't about mental health particularly, but it was very much motivated by a concern for, the well-being of frontline healthcare professionals. And that's something I got an insight into because, after Milton, my brother, recovered, we made a show which was about cancer, and we showed it to healthcare in medical schools. And we did one showing with about 200 oncology nurses. And they talked about, what it's like to be on an oncology ward, dealing with very sick patients, giving very toxic treatments. And, that's when we saw the kind of other side of it. We'd been so obsessed with, the patient's perspective, and then we saw the other side, and it's kind of like balancing that. So it's very much motivated by that concern. And of course, with COVID, that's become even more topical. We're now kind of facing, in all likelihood, a sort of epidemic of PTSD and other mental health issues for people who've been, experiencing, situations in which the patient's emotional well-being probably isn't, if they're COVID sufferers, might not be the primary thing. It's, life on the line, and in which the healthcare professionals' work is there. So I want to say a little bit more about how we've used it educationally. Do I have time to do that? Or do you want to go to Fiona for a bit first?
Nicky, I wondered if...
No, I'm on social media at the minute, tapping all. Guys, go ahead, don't mind me.
Fiona,
I'll let you know as soon as I get questions in.
Shall I say a couple more things?
Yeah.
So we've shown it in nursing schools, and in particular at Kingston, where it was made. But we've also developed these kind of lessons where we use techniques from actor training, and we adapt them for nurses to kind of support things like non-verbal communication, confidence, emotional resilience, voice skills through which you can learn confidence. And we've had some really, really good feedback from students. We've got about 90, we've done kind of surveys over 3 years now, because it's been part of the curriculum at Kingston. About 90% rate it, say that they'd use the learning in their clinical practice. And then I've created a kind of online version now that we've gone online. So there's a sort of digital version, which I can make available to people if they're interested. And I don't. If we have time, I've got a little 90-minute clip of the show which we can see either now or a bit later. Do you want to do that now and then?
Yeah, and then it leads to what you're talking about.
So what we're seeing here is a nurse called Pip. She's a children's nurse, and she's having to cannulate a patient called Darren, who's about 8 years old and who has cystic fibrosis and needs IV antibiotics, and his mum can't come in.
Red car stopped at the traffic lights. What are they doing?
Sorry, David, could you start beginning?
Car and stopped.
Thank you.
Darren! Hey, Mum's on her way, but we're going to start without her. So, we'll be okay, no, won't we? And, how's that hand? Nice and numb? Okay, fantastic. Sharp scratch then. Oh, that silly hand jumped away, didn't it? Let's try and keep it there, shall we? Try again, shall we? Oh, I tell you what, Darren, why don't you look out the window and tell me what you can see, and then what can you? Is there a blue car out there? Can you see the blue car? There's a little red car stopped at the traffic lights. What are they doing? Maybe if you could, maybe they could get in their car and then they would be stuck so much there, and then you could drive away. But that's at the moment completely. That's done. Great, brilliant. All done. Got my little bandage on, and then it's all right, Darren. It's all done. It's all over. It's all over now, and now we can play Snap. No, go away! Okay. Yeah, no, I completely understand. I'm sorry.
It's really powerful, that, isn't it? I think it really captures how it's completely stripped back and the focus is completely on her and her interactions, isn't it? And sort of the believability in the way that she's communicating, that you go into the sort of mindset of thinking that he's actually there. And as you say, the way she's communicating with the child, and you can tell that it's a child. It's massively relevant in mental health, isn't it, Nicky, as well? I think
as well, when you see things like that, it reminds you of your own nurse voice.
Totally.
There's a lot of guilty faces I can see there. But and one of the things I was talking to someone the other day, I only ever say popped when I'm under pressure as a nurse. So like pop your trousers back on, that kind of stuff. I never have to use the word popped in any part of my life. But it's just when I'm in that zone, I'm trying to minimize whatever's going on, like pop knife on the side or whatever it is, in that kind of really weird voice. And I hear it come out of myself sometimes and I think, who's that person? So there's something I think about kind of a performance, which is part of maybe being a nurse, maybe being a teacher as well, in that it's part of you, but it's not you.
Yeah.
I think you really notice it when you see it in somebody else, because it's like a shared face, isn't it? We all have.
Definitely.
Really, yeah. And nurse voice as well. So the tones of voice I've never used in any part of my personal life that I would use if I was trying to get people to calm down on a ward, or if I was trying to restore balance in a situation, should we politely say, or talk to a child who was frightened. It's really interesting, isn't it? You suddenly see how much of your caring is performance. And I don't mean that in a way that it's not meant or that it's not genuine or it's not real, but that it's something that we do, something that you see other people do and something that you copy, and an outfit that you put on in the same way you might put on a uniform if you're a general nurse.
I think it does spill into other areas of your life. There's been so many times in my life where I've dealt with, people who've been aggressive, for example, and other people have said to me afterwards, oh, you could tell you're a mental health nurse, the way that you handled that. And I think it is because you learn about how to stand, where to stand, your tone of voice, warmth in your tone, matching, the mood matching and all the other strategies. And, and I'm very conscious from a risk point of view where I sit in a room with my back's to things.
Very much so.
If I'm talking to someone and I'm stood over them, or if I'm talking to someone and they're stood over me, and how I feel about that, and, vulnerability of that as well. So.
But is that your hypervigilance or is that your nursing?
Yeah.
Because it makes us all a bit strange.
I know, a bit of both, really.
I've never been able to tell when people say, you can tell you're a mental health nurse, if that's a compliment or not.
Absolutely, yeah.
Of course it is.
100% sure about where they're going with that.
It's double-edged, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. Yeah.
So, yeah, that was great. I'm wondering if we should move over to Fiona now, because, and then we'll come back to Alex, because you've got a very different perspective with your work. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, thank you. So, yeah, talking really, what Nicky said really chimes with me as far as, helping our students to prepare themselves for going into placement. So I deal mostly with pre-registration student nurses, adult mental health, learning disability and child health students. So we have this whole range, and it is very much like you say, it's about helping them, preparing them for placement. And I suppose we've moved beyond the simulation lab. Like Alex was saying, we use the simulation lab a lot to help bring that realism for students and help that authentic learning, help them rehearse for the real thing. And I suppose with our drama project, we had an opportunity to develop that a little bit further and enable students to use rehearsals and play time, developing a play, and I suppose using rehearsals almost as a workshop to develop scenes and to reflect back on whether that was realistic, how that felt, what it was like to play a different professional coming from a different perspective. So that's what we found was really interesting. It started off when, before I arrived at Napier, one of our lecturers was invited to the Scottish Parliament because his role was in public health, and he was invited to go and see a play called Mad, Bad, Invisible. And this was written by a family member of somebody who went through quite a traumatic experience with their mental health, relying on the services within the Edinburgh at that time. And everything kind of went wrong, really. They kind of slipped through the cracks. And so it meant that this person ended up, instead of getting the care they needed from A&E or from their GP and getting their housing situation sorted out because they became homeless and they were using alcohol to self-medicate and so on. So instead of getting the help that they needed at that time, they were kind of passed from pillar to post through all these, disintegrated services. And this was at a time where health and social care integration was starting to come together, and it had just become legislation in Scotland at this point. Yeah. And the point of the play was to demonstrate how disintegrated things were and how services needed to work better together. And so the team that performed that was actually funded by a charity which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. It was called COMAS. I can't actually remember what it stands for, I'm really sorry. But it was a mental health charity, and it supported people with mental health and substance use issues. And it was to support them to develop and get over their issues and help them to live better with their long-term conditions. And it enabled people through use of a cafe called the Serenity Cafe, which used to be in Edinburgh, to kind of develop those coping strategies and to get better. That was the aim. And so a group of service users from the Serenity Cafe and from COMAS were invited to take part in this performance at the Scottish Parliament. So they developed and produced and performed Mad, Bad, Invisible for Scottish MSPs and people in healthcare like my colleague who was invited along. And so it had a huge impact, that play. It told the story of the individual who went through the mental health crisis and how they went from pillar to post and fell through the cracks and ended up in prison. Eventually did get help and there was a good end at the end. They did manage to get out of prison and recover and do well with the help they got in prison. But obviously there was a whole host of things that went wrong in the interim. So it was so impactful that my colleague Richard, who went to see it, came back to the university still feeling the power of the play, and feeling that he really needed to get the message across. And he was also charged, coincidentally, with being involved in a new module for our second year student nurses about health and social care integration. And so all the pieces started to fit together. And as I arrived at Napier, I was lucky enough to get involved in the project, which was to invite student nurses to perform the play. We did it in a public space in the Serenity Cafe, the cafe where the real events played out in real life. So it was quite special. We invited MSPs and healthcare professionals and a range of people and service users, and we performed it there and we videoed it there. So it was a bit of an amateur video, but we videoed it there, and we had a public debate afterwards.
Yeah, I was going to
so that was the journey. It was an amazing experience, and I was just sort of the standby person. I was the helper-outer. It was great to be there. I knew everyone's lines because I was the understudy for everyone. But the students performed it, and we had Gillian, who'd produced the play and directed the play from the start, directed it for our students at that point, and that was kind of the beginning of our journey. It was really interesting because the public really engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, and Nicky knows that I like to refer to the prison system when I'm on MHTV, because I do think that people in prisons and people with addictions are often people who are never given a voice, because we other them away from society, and we assume that they're bad people or the lost causes. So there's some absolutely brilliant, as you probably know, drama companies who are doing work with prisons and sort of verbatim drama, which I think is brilliant, where, you know, using their actual stories and voices. And I know that I had the honour of speaking at the House of Commons a couple of years or so ago about pregnant women in prison. And when I was thinking about what I was going to say, I was thinking, how am I going to get the message across? And what I decided to do in the end is that I'd been involved in this poetry project where they'd all written, some of the women who were mums had written poems which were published. So I took some of the poems and I read them, and I read some letters, and you know, it was just so powerful because all the other talks that day were very much about sort of mainstream health and care problems, but when I talked about women in prison and, you know, shared their kind of own experiences, people had no idea, you know, and so I totally it's fantastic, you know, to do that. And I think the audience kind of having the opportunity for discussion at the end. I think when I love theatre myself, and the most powerful theatre I've seen is when you get that opportunity. I remember going to see the Stephen Lawrence inquiry years ago at theatre at West Yorkshire Playhouse. And what I really remember about that was actually the panel discussion afterwards rather than the actual play, I would say. So, yeah, it's...
it really, you could tell... We got people to write feedback forms afterwards, and we kept them, and a lot of the comments talked about how this experience, obviously we were still in very early stages of trying to integrate services, to be fair, but they were talking about how it really did chime with their own experiences, and how it was so important that the people who were policymakers who were there, and you know, guideline writers and all that kind of thing, heard the story, and because it was so powerful, it really made you think about the individuals involved.
Well, I think that's the thing, yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that's exactly it. And, you know, thinking back to my experience there, you know, there's a massive issue about women when they come out of prison actually finding any housing that's family centred where they can take the child, so the child doesn't end up in the care system. And looking at it in terms of housing from a bureaucratic point of view, you don't have that empathic connection, but actually hearing somebody's story and about how life-changing it can be to find suitable accommodation after prison for you and your child, you know, it kind of, it it hammers it home at a completely different level, doesn't it? And it's that humanity, I think, of it. So
yeah. And I think for our students, the learning for our students was they were there with us every step of the way. We adapted the play slightly because we had an all-female cast. The original character was male. And so we adapted it. And then the students, some of them went on to perform in the Fringe in another NHS sort of, it was around, would it have been 60 years of the NHS then? That might have been that year. And so they did a play around that. And they got to meet some of the original cast because of all the networking they were doing. So they met some of the original cast from Mad, Bad, Invisible. And then after that, the story gets even better because one of our students who was in the play and then went on to do the module the next year. So she saw Mad, Bad, Invisible, the play, integrated into our module, enabling students to empathise with the characters and each of the different individual professionals from health and social care and what their views were and how they could have responded in a more compassionate way, in a more joined up way. And so she saw all of that, but she said, well, actually, this is so mental health focused, she said. I reckon I can write another play and we can enhance this module even more. So she did.
Yes,
So Trisha, if you're out there, I don't think she can make it tonight. She's on a shift, I'm afraid. She's now qualified. But she wrote this play and she called it, well, because we had Mad, Bad, Invisible, she decided to call it Sad, Old, Invisible. I think she wanted to talk about an older person. And then we changed it to Cracks because it was all about falling through the cracks, also showing a more positive story about how health and social care integration can work. Yeah. And on the other hand, a contrasting character where it didn't work quite so well. Yeah. So she created these two characters called Bob and Debbie, and she told their story through her play. And so it also involved children's health, nursing and learning disabilities because Bob was a carer for his granddaughter. So it kind of pulled together all of the fields of nursing, if you like, and help all of the students have a bit of a deeper connection with some of the characters. And it just meant that we had now Mad, Bad, Invisible and Cracks to be able to draw on and to be able to talk about all of these characters, which the students could really, understand, really empathise with and feel that sympathetic presence with. And it really helped enhance the module. I mean, students loved it, I can tell you that. They certainly evaluated the module a little bit better after we did all these things, so it was great. And it was just really helpful to have the students involved in it because the second play was very much produced by students. We just were in the wings helping, and they really drove it forward.
They must have been really motivated and keen as well, because presumably they didn't have performing arts backgrounds, no?
No, they didn't. I mean, they had passion for it, very much passion for it, but none of them had much experience. Some of them had done a bit of AmDram or a bit of drama at school, but mostly they were just really keen to, and they were amateurs. So we're not saying that the acting in our plays that we've recorded is tip top or anything. It's very amateur, but it's more about the experience that they're able to demonstrate and they're able to put across, and also share with their classmates, because we can share their experiences of becoming the character as well, of stepping into the shoes of those characters, and we use them obviously to discuss in our module about what it means for individuals, as you said, Vanessa, how important it is to understand the individual story, to be able to understand what an impact some of our health services can have or not have, and how it can be well or not well. So
is that module, is it ongoing? Or
it is, yeah. So I still actually teach on it now, and we've got our new program up in Scotland. We all went to the new Bachelor of Nursing program in 2020, so the new version will run next year. And the plays are still embedded, and we're still going to be talking about similar themes, because even though there's lots that's improved in health and social care integration, obviously, there's still situations where problems occur, people do still fall through the cracks, as we know, and we can always improve and do better. So yeah, we've been, and because we've recorded it, of course, we've got an easy way to keep using the materials and the different scenes. So, and it works on multi-levels, which is great. I saw something in one of the recordings I've not seen before. We had a scene with a multidisciplinary team in it talking, and I know that sounds really boring, but they're talking about the discharges of Bob and Debbie. And we worked on this scene quite a lot because, number one, it could, it was a bit talky, not very actiony. And number two, we weren't too sure about how bad to make one of the characters to make it more interesting, and what was realistic and what was a bit, we didn't want it to be too farcical. We didn't want it to be too funny, because the problem was it was becoming a little bit too, dodgy. So we kind of had to work on that quite a bit. And I guess the scene in the end, I noticed when I looked at it, I thought, actually, I feel really sorry for that character now, because actually we'd had to sort of demonstrate some of the contrasting interactions and difficulties. And I was chatting to my students about, well, actually, I think maybe the team could have helped that person out a bit more there, don't you think? And, those kind of discussions have come out of it as well. So it's quite useful on a range of levels.
Very useful. Nicky, should we come over to you?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. One from Adrian saying, really impressive work, guys. Love that. Using drama as an amazing way of teaching. Have you in assessing decision making, but an amazing slant looking at the nurse and their actions. The immersive nature of it's really well done and beneficial across all the curricula. What's really interesting is a student has texted me to say, I love the idea of it, but I'm horrified at the thought I might be asked to do it.
I know, yeah.
Had any thoughts about how do you cope with that balance?
I have that when I lead workshops with nursing students, we just have to be really, really careful how to frame it, and so that people feel safe. And I think a key thing is to acknowledge that people are going to feel, it's the same with kind of sim learning, role play, people are uncomfortable. And, the first thing is always to kind of acknowledge that people can feel uncomfortable, and then just make things as easy as possible for people. And the key thing is always to hammer home why you're doing something. So often we'll do really things that, if somebody walked into the classroom and saw us wander, leading each other around with our eyes closed or leaning up against each other, or things that we do, they'd say, what have I walked into? But I found that if you can be really, really clear and invite the students to say, this connects to my work in this way, well, then it can get quite adventurous. You can get really interesting, engaging in things that, they probably didn't think they would be doing. And the key thing is to make it fun as well. We do a second year one, which uses kind of games to think about how we manage, how we deal with stress and elevated heart rates and the flight or flight adrenaline kind of things. We use kind of competitive games. And it's fun, and people, added values, they can enjoy themselves, and they have a moment of bonding with their classmates.
Yeah. Could you as well involve people in some of the non-performance aspects of it as well, for people who were, introverted and didn't want to get involved, like, as you say, like in the production of it? Or
So I don't get students performing. Fiona's much braver than that. I get them doing, actor style exercises in a classroom, which is lower stakes for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got a couple more, because I'm just looking at the time. This is whizzed by again. Really, so we're heading towards 4:15. To the question, does anyone else have a nurse voice? Tony Butterworth, CBE, says yes. Absolutely. The jury's out on whether it's a compliment. Generally, people think yes, it's a compliment to be asked if you're a mental health nurse. They're not 100% sure, but generally. And someone else has said, when developing a theme, where's the best place to start? Are you allowed to develop from within the students or the service user voice? So that's an interesting question there.
Good question.
I suppose from our perspective, because we we certainly, the student who created the play Cracks, she was networking with some service users. So I think she was bouncing ideas off those people who were involved, and they became our community actors. And I guess we are trying very much to portray authentic experiences.
Yes.
So the involvement of those people has really helped us to think about how we present things. So, for example, in some of the scenes that we workshopped with them, we would be asking them, how does it feel in that position? Does that seem authentic to you? And those were learning opportunities as well during the rehearsals. I think the limits for us at the moment have been that we've not been able to expand it really wide through our student group yet. We'd love to do more of it, and I'm working on that in a new module that I'll be running that's going to be around patient safety and human factors. So I'm hoping to do more of using rehearsal in the classroom to support students to rehearse how they might communicate better. It sounds a bit like what you were talking about, Alex, about there'll probably need to be some understanding of some of the acting tools that they might need, and to be able to do that. But that's probably the next step at the moment. Hopefully, if we can get people back into the classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At some point.
My response to that is that it's much more usual in a healthcare education context to make performances about the patient experience.
Yeah.
And it's very clear to see how that how that's useful. Just to note that I met Fiona because last year we ran a big conference which was trying to see all the different nursing midwifery departments, how they're using drama. And the key thing we identified is that there's a lot going on, but they're not joined up. People don't have the opportunity to talk to each other. And Fiona and I are part of a sort of national working group that's just been set up to try and advance research in relation to that. And that's one of the findings, that a lot of the work is, disparate. A lot of it's based on the patient for very good reason. But actually, I think there's a real opportunity to do work that looks more closely at the healthcare professional and about the relationship. So it becomes kind of relationship centered.
So where should people contact if they want to be part of that work?
Performance for Care is what it's called.
We'll tweet that out.
info@performanceforcare.org, I think. But if you Google Performance for Care, you'll see a lovely website.
We'll definitely share that.
Got all the blurb on it. Yeah. But also start with what, for me, like I said, the seed of Careful came from 2005, this experience of my brother. I think when you're making an artwork, even if it's for a kind of clear purpose like education, I think it's really important to start with what's close to your heart and what you feel strongly about.
Yeah, definitely. Nicky, was that your questions there?
Just checking the last ones. No, there's some repeated sorts of questions. So there's again this idea about wanting to do it, but not wanting to be the person who does it, which I think is quite funny. There's obviously you've tapped into a real issue there, because in different forms it's about 3 different times. Let's call that.
People
so,
as well.
I guess what we can do is, because we are really hitting our 45 minutes now, is to make sure that all these links are tweeted out and connected up. So that'll go on to the Facebook and the Twitter page. And if anybody has any questions they haven't had a chance to ask, or they want to get in touch, they'll be able to do that on those, and we'll check back and see what people are doing. But for me, I've really enjoyed tonight's conversation. I'm absolutely, as ever, surprised how quickly it's gone.
I know, me too. There's so much more I'd like to ask you both, really. I guess just before we finish, just to give you both the opportunity to make, for any final comments, messages to take away.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think, it's to thank people who have chosen the career in healthcare. I owe my brother's life and actually my own life in another situation to them. And to say how important it is that we as a society care for you in order to enable you to care for us. And, really about, huge thank you. And I really hope post-COVID we'll have a world where, where you are supported very well to do a very difficult and demanding job.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I suppose for me, I think what I've been thinking about is all the possibilities, next steps and things. So I think sometimes you just have to be brave and grab opportunities when they come along. And that's certainly what we did at Napier, and what we've done with Alex. It's been to sort of try and reach out to people and network and try and find these opportunities to try something different that can engage students in a bit of learning that is meaningful, and that they can really get to grips with what it's like for other people. So,
and don't be scared to do it. I know people feel daunted by the idea of pretending to be a tree or whatever, but you know, once you're in there, it's fine. You know, if you've got a good facilitator, it's completely fine.
Yeah, it's a really good message. Well, it's been fascinating, and thank you both so much. And I'm sure everyone who's been listening has found it really interesting, and you know, we'll continue to follow what you're doing. And as Nicky says, we'll make sure that we tweet out lots of links and things so people can find out more about this. And thank you both very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Bye.